This episode of the Can We Please Talk podcast is presented by our friends over at SeatGeek. Do not hit skip right now because your next best night ever is waiting, and SeatGeek has the tickets, shows, sporting events, whatever you want to go to SeatGeek.com right now. SeatGeek.com right now. Enter in the promo code Can We Please Talk to get $20 off that purchase. Head to SeatGeek.com today.
This is not an attempt to ban TikTok. It's an attempt to make TikTok better. Tic-tac-toe.
Hey, everybody. Welcome into an all-new episode of the Can We Please Talk podcast. As always, I'm Mike Leon.
And I'm Nick Severi.
On the program today, well, just like Nancy Pelosi said, tic-tac-toe, we're going to talk about the TikTok ban. It was just passed in the House of Representatives. Nick and I are going to deep dive on this platform with over 1 billion monthly users. I'm saying it in my Austin Powers Dr. Evil voice. 1 billion monthly users. Its reach, its impact, should it be banned in the U.S.? More from us on this in just a bit. Plus, later on in the program, speaking of the TikTok ban that was passed in the House, Representative Jasmine Crockett from the great state of Texas joins the pod. We're going to get into the TikTok legislation because she voted present on the bill. She's going to explain why in just a bit. We're going to dive into immigration. She represents a state that borders with Mexico. What she makes of the recent legislative attempts at fixing the issues at our U.S. southern border and more. All of that in just a bit with Representative Crockett, a fantastic interview. So excited that we had her on the program. Some quick housekeeping notes from us. An all-new episode of Back Your Play with Q is available now over on leonmedianetwork.com or listen to it wherever you get your pods. Q welcomes in Pro Football Writers of America, Lloyd Vance joined the show. They recap all the NFL free agency news, the recent spat between Tiki Barber and Saquon Barkley. If you haven't seen this exchange that went viral on Twitter and the back and forths and another analyst on TV that got involved in it, a lot of fun. Rich and Lloyd break it all down. A lot of news happening all over the NFL. Our Raiders making some waves there, Nick, as well. So go check out that episode of Back Your Play with Q over on leonmedianetwork.com or listen to it wherever you get your pods. An all-new episode of Ask the Experts is out there. Kern welcomes in former WBA and WBC welterweight champion Keith Thurman. He comes on. He's got a big fight coming up March 30th on Amazon Prime against Tim Tszyu. If you missed that episode where Kern also previewed the Ryan Garcia-Devin Haney match that's happening April 20th, Kern went to the press conference. He spoke with Haney and Garcia. He spoke with Oscar De La Hoya. He spoke with Bernard Hopkins. All of that over on Ask the Experts. Go download that podcast. Listen to it wherever you get your pods or over on leonmedianetwork.com. Last but not least, in this promotion of all the shows we got here, Nick, your show, all new episode of the Educate US podcast is out there. This week, Nick and Stacy welcome in USC adjunct professor and author Dr. Jerome Rucker to talk about his new book coming out and how creating safe spaces in our conversations about race and equity is essential. This is a really good conversation. Sometimes those words, race and equity, makes people roll their eyes. You know what? It shouldn't. We should have frank conversations about this stuff. So go check out that episode and more from the folks over at the Educate US show over on leonmedianetwork.com or listen to it wherever you get your pods. All right, now I say hello to my buddy, my partner in crime, the man that I think we had class together his junior year, my freshman year on the campus of Rutgers University. Nick, how you doing, buddy? How's everything going your way?
Good. Yeah. And again, thanks for the promotion for the show. It's funny. I started shifting our outro to focus more on Element as well. Just kind of talk about just the easiest way for people to access the program and, be exposed to the other programs on the network, which has been good. So I'm good. It's funny. I come into this conversation today in an interesting place about TikTok because I actually deleted it from my phone. Way back when, just early on when there were rumblings about data breaches and stuff. And whether it had anything to do with the Chinese government, I'm at a loss for sort of what was going through my head. All I knew was it just sounded like there was a possibility of my information getting out there. So I was like, it's one less app I need to use. But so I had conflicts about it, and especially seeing how that play out in Congress is interesting to say the least. So I'm excited to dive into this.
Yeah, for sure. I was going to say it's so funny because That's one of the questions that you asked Representative Crockett. I don't want to bury the lead here, but you kind of asked her about data breaches and stuff like that, because this is what we're trying to do with this show, right? Like, here's a topic that's playing out in the news circles. People may not know some of this stuff about TikTok. Why is a social media app that important? I'm going to get into the stats and how many monthly users there are here in the US. But, when we talk about subject matter experts with respect to our show, this is what I've been doing for the last 15, years in product and technology. I'm actually going to read you in a bit a privacy policy from one of the companies I worked at and how we collect your data and what we do with it, because I think it's important. People don't read that stuff. They just click acknowledge, they hit accept, they hit the little blue icon, and they don't read it. They don't hit reject all. They don't hit any of that. Nick and I are going to get into that in a sec. So I'm glad I kind of said that, because you're kind of the test case for, how when you ever have an experiment, you have a control, right? And then you have, I forget the other variable, but I'm the other variable, because I got all the apps I'm using all the time. You've deleted it. Every time I send you something from LinkedIn, you're like, I don't have the app on my phone. I send you something from Twitter, you're like, I deleted it recently. So you're like the back and forth example. But you know what? Let's dive into our first segment here, Nick, because if you haven't heard anything about this bill that passed recently in the House, we're going to find out if it passed the smell test in the Senate. But take a listen to this bill coming down last week, the House passing it almost unanimously. A few consents and one person that voted present. She's going to be on with us in just a second. But take a listen to this.
The heated battle over the future of TikTok here in the U.S. 170 million users here in this country. Tonight, the House, by an overwhelming majority, Democrats and Republicans, passing a measure to ban the Chinese-owned app here in the U.S. unless TikTok is sold to an American company within 6 months. The move sparking strong reaction from TikTok users, some protesting outside the Capitol, many arguing it's not just dancing videos and viral clips. Some say it's their livelihood, their business. TikTok fighting back tonight, a heavy lobbying effort on the Hill. But tonight, why does TikTok look so different in China than it does here in the U.S.? Why are there more restrictions, more protections for young people in China than in the U.S.? And if U.S. social media is banned in China, many are now asking, why allow a Chinese company to have such a large and influential presence here?
That was ABC News and David Beard. It makes a good point right there, too, because it is different from what it looks like, in China versus what it looks like here. The Chinese version of TikTok is actually Douyin. I think I'm saying that right. But again, you got to excuse my Puerto Rican accent for a second. The House passed this bill, like he mentioned there, overwhelming 352 to 65, one voted present. Obviously, we mentioned that a bunch. Now it goes to the Senate. We're going to find out if its prospects have any chance of actually passing. But 170 million American users, as of last check, according to the Associated Press, use TikTok. TikTok is wholly owned subsidiary of a Chinese technology firm called ByteDance. We're going to get into a sec who ByteDance is, who's on the board. But the biggest thing about TikTok and why it's all a buzz right now is because some statistics around TikTok is that it's one of the fastest growing platforms in terms of just active users. It has 1 billion monthly active users worldwide. It's been downloaded over 3 billion times since its launch in 2016. It's rapidly grown. It's available in 141 countries out of 155. 91% of all the countries that it can possibly be in, TikTok is available. It's translated in 39 different languages. ByteDance has been valued recently at $200 billion as of Q4 of 2023. 19% of TikTok's global audience consists of men ages 18 to 24. 18% of the platform's users in the same age group are women. The majority of the content creators that are on TikTok, we're going to get into them in a second, some recent things that folks have said about taking away this platform and how people really make a living on this platform is content creators that are ages between 18 to 24. Just by comparison, real quick, Nick, global TikTok monthly users, right? Facebook has 2.9 billion monthly users, YouTube 2.2 billion, Instagram 1.4 billion, TikTok with 1 billion, nobody else even over that. So of the four main platforms, that user behavior is the biggest thing as a product manager myself and somebody who's worked in product and technology. You want to try to change user behavior. When you're launching something new, people are used to going to this place for sports, this place for news, this place for music. TikTok has been able to crack that and being able to come into the social media landscape where people go for video reels, find out news of the day. It's, it's this true global platform, and it really has a bunch of content types that are on there. We're going to get into some of that in just a second. Just on a high level surface here, I read some of the stats there. About the bill, like I mentioned, 352 to 65. It's really bipartisan support on this. Representative Kathy McRogers, from a Republican from Washington, said, "We've given TikTok a clear choice: separate from your parent company, ByteDance, which they think is beholden to the Chinese Communist Party, and you can remain operational in the U.S." So that's pretty much it. The Republicans and Democrats, some have veered from that. We're going to talk to one in a second, but the main thing has been they feel that ByteDance is an extension or is working in conjunction with the Chinese Communist Party. And so the data that is being collected from this platform can be shared with the government. Just at a high level for you, as I read the stats and the bill, what do you make of it all? Is it, well, what's going on here? You just mentioned you deleted it, but you didn't even think about the Chinese. You just thought about your screen time. So what do you make of the platform and this bill and the way Congress is up in arms to an extent about this?
Yeah. In isolation, I mean, we're talking about, the House of Representatives, vast majority, feeling that a certain product, poses a threat because of the ownership model behind it. And I've been curious as you were talking about this, is TikTok, unique that way? Are there other companies that have a level of ownership with the Chinese where something similar could be questioned? I mean, obviously, one of the first things I did when this decision was when this bill was being discussed was I just did a quick search to see, the top 10 data breaches, because it seems like one of the big things here is a security concern. So I was curious about, over the past 10 years, where, the top 10 that have come. And, some of the prominent companies that stood out, like number one on that list was Yahoo. I think number 8 was Equifax. And it was companies I'm very familiar with. And so I wondered about if this is a matter about, punishing a company that has either a history or the potential of trafficking our data, then that's fair. But then I would say, why aren't we, taking the same tone, legislatively speaking, with other companies? But the flip side of it is that, is this idea of the Chinese government. And I've just been curious. I mean, I don't have an answer on this, and I do want to do some digging on my own of, is this the most unique situation? Is this, by itself, the only situation we're dealing with? Or are there other situations where, the Chinese or other governments that we're not necessarily trusting at the moment, that have access to something, be it our information, like whatever, that we should be looking at as well? I don't know. But it's funny to me because it's like we're talking about the Republican Party. When has the Republican Party ever presented itself as being anti-business? And this is a current version of the Republican Party that seems to have mixed views on the criticism of Vladimir Putin, but is very, very much anti-Chinese, or the anti-Chinese government. And I'm not trying to poke holes in the argument. I do understand this from a security standpoint. But it just felt like we're either singling out TikTok or we're trying to create this situation where their situation is unique that way. So I've been sitting with that. That's my initial wondering. The anti-business stance from the Republicans, at least for TikTok users, and I have heard this from NPR and other outlets, of just the number of people that have just been outright concerned and outraged that the platform that they're using as a way of generating their own revenue is being threatened. And for a one political party to really just openly say, we don't care, this kind of bill is saying that we don't care how you make your money, we think that this is a graver concern, is astounding to me, because it just seems to fly in the face of what that party's ethics and values have always been.
Yeah, well, I will say, we've had a couple of Dems on the show that are, anti-China. Representative Seth Moulton was on a subcommittee to investigate some actions by the CCP there. He voted in favor of this bill, I believe. But there's two tracks to this bill, because the first track is what you mentioned about data collection, right? That is a concern. And obviously they want them to disassociate ByteDance from they want them to give the appearance of they're doing data collection and storage here in the United States as opposed to in China. The issue is the second tract kind of follows in, kind of piggybacks here. It's the sidecar to it, but it's the one that, Representative Crockett tells us about in just a little bit. It's the algorithm, right? It's what type of content types and information TikTok is funneling us down, because it tracks your user behavior. So let me explain to you folks real quick, as I may get into a little soliloquy here of how this works. Because one of the things that I've done as a product manager, senior product manager, is you're building an experience. You have the UI, UX, you got the user interface and the user experience, right? So you want to make it look the way other applications look, so it's not hard for people to come in cold and use. That's from the iconography that you see on the application. Where's my home? Is the search a little circle, so I know that that's the search bar? What does my profile page look like? Can I set up a picture? Can I upload it from my phone? Does it integrate with other social platforms? Like, can I post this TikTok video quickly to Twitter or Instagram or Facebook? People look for that. That's the user experience, right? People rarely click on what I mentioned before, the privacy policy and terms of use or service. That shows you how your information is stored and how it's collected. I want to read for you real quick, Nick, something that I put together in conjunction with the legal department at a previous job that I was working at. And if you clicked on our privacy policy, and you can do this right now in conjunction if you go to Twitter, X, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, if you're still using Snapchat. And I encourage people right now, just take a quick moment, takes 5 minutes, read the privacy policy, skim through it. There's going to be tabs that show you information we collect, how we use your information, when we disclose your information, okay? Personal data, your rights and choices. And then there's obviously some one-offs to people that live in different states, because California and Nevada have different privacy information and notices that they let their residents know. If you live in that territory, this is the way we collect your data, and this is what's actually done with it. The first thing that it says in a privacy policy that, again, I've not only written, but the legal team at the previous places that I've worked at wrote out, I'm figuring out where it's being served, if it makes sense in the grand scheme of things. Are there links and one-offs in the FAQ so people can know where to get this information? Do we message them so that way they have to accept and acknowledge it? Because most of the time you have to do that. Not most of the time, all the time, if you work with any legal departments. And the information we collect is the first thing that you see when you click on the privacy policy. We collect information in multiple ways, including when you provide information directly to us, when we passively collect information from you, such as information collected from your browser or device. So folks, when you hit allow, ask app not to track, all of those times you get those type of questions, those are the passive methods that we're collecting and storing your data. I want to skim real quick because, again, I encourage people to read this. It takes 5 to 10 minutes. But one quick note that I wanted to recommend for people, because there's going to be, or there should be, a section that says how we use your information. The apps that I worked at were in sports, music. So they had a little bit of a social functionality, not to the same extent that Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram have, but they do have the same data collection information. Sometimes it's credit cards, sometimes it's license information, date of birth, email, your full name, mailing address, because if you win something from a gamification standpoint. And so one of the things that we mentioned here, and you can read it in the privacy policies, will say the purposes for which you provided your information, this is the way we use it: to provide features, services, and products available to you, send you information about your relationship or transactions with us, send you alerts or communications, send you SMS messages, notify you about new features, including but not limited to discounts, events, news about our service, administer sweepstakes and contests. So that way, if we want to retarget you and hit you back up and you want to enter a contest to do something, win a prize, we can do that. To process and respond to your inquiries. So if you have an issue with the application, Every time you do that interaction, we're storing that information. We're also using it for internal research and reporting and data analytics, because the job of the product team will be, how do we keep people engaged and not leaving this platform? And the biggest thing, and people always say this all the time, "Oh, I left my phone and I wasn't looking at this, and now all of a sudden I'm seeing an ad for this," right? How many times have you said that in your life? Well, read right there in the privacy policy. It says to allow us and our advertising partners to personalize the content and advertising that you see on the services or other websites and mobile applications. And then lastly, you'll get some legal jargon that says enforce the legal or contractual terms that govern your use of services. And then lastly, protect the safety of all who use our services. So you get all of that information if you just take a couple of minutes to read that. I encourage people right now, whatever app, even the platform that you may be listening to us on, Spotify, Apple, click on the privacy policy. Pick on how because remember, Apple has you sign in with your Apple ID, which is tied to what? Your phone, to your Apple Pay, to everything. It's all interconnected, but they're explaining to you how they capture your information and how they store your data, most importantly. So I wanted people to get a quick summation of that, because I think it's important. I don't know any other podcast that's read out a privacy policy for you, but I'm trying to explain it to you in real time too, because from the product lens, the legal team won't let things clear if it doesn't meet the standards. And again, the government hasn't interfered in social media platforms or some of these other content provider platforms just yet. They've interfered when it comes to mergers or or somebody buying out somebody else, but they haven't, interfered from not only a content moderation standpoint, but a data collection standpoint. So I wanted to address that real quick. Let's get a couple of reactions here, Nick, because I do want to play some exchanges that recently played out. One on the Democratic side, Representative Ro Khanna from the great state of California. He went on, he put out this video. It was primarily on TikTok, but it was on other platforms, explaining why he was a no vote for the bill that passed in the House. Take a listen to this.
I will be voting no on the bill to ban TikTok that hurts the free speech of influencers, creators, activists, and organizers. This is a platform used by both the left and the right to challenge the political establishment for justice and cleaning up politics. If you want to protect people's data, pass an Internet Bill of Rights to do that. Don't ban the political speech of 170 million Americans. I'm a no.
All right, so you heard a little bit of that there. He's a no. Banning the political speech. I don't know if it necessarily does that. I think that's a little bit disingenuous, because the platform has other types of speech. And again, the way the algorithm feeds you, again, I'm not, an MI engineer or anything like that, or ML, engineer. So I couldn't be able to tell you some of that, but keeping you engaged and serving you other content types. If you notice on TikTok, people never do this. There's a button right in your right tab. It's the three little dots. And if you click on it, there'll be a way where you scroll to the right on the bar, and you can say not interested in seeing this video. So that way it knows that it doesn't serve you other content types like that, because in their content management system, they probably have videos like this tagged with the designations. When we upload a video, Nick, for example, to our TikTok page, and you can follow us over at Can We Please Talk Podcast until the app is no longer in use here in the US. But when we upload a video, there's hashtags that are associated with it. We put hashtags, FYP, which means for your page, Reels, so that when people are searching through these hashtag Reels, and we do a lot of news, politics, info, podcasts, commentary, and then depending upon what the subject was, Israel, Gaza, so that way it would get into the funnel and the hashtag funnel, because a lot of times people use the search engine to search out videos. TikTok is sorting that on the back end, and those videos will now get served as you're continuing to scroll up and get more content types, until you tell them you don't want that. And they've minimized that button and don't give you a way to see how to minimize that. Very seldomly used, I've noticed, by people just in informal research that I've done with folks. Again, user behavior. It's the hardest thing to change in this industry. Okay, so that was Representative Ro Khanna. And by the way, Jamal Bowman's been on this program, another Democrat from New York, and he kind of said the same thing when he met with influencers. And I mentioned it to Representative Crockett in just a bit, but it was kind of like the same thing. Like, these folks make their money from there. They're afraid that they're going to lose this platform. And yes, we're still concerned about, the data collection and the relationship with the Chinese government. But I want you to take a listen to, again, Fox News, Nick. Okay, so beware of the source here. Brian Kilmeade, Fox and Friends, had your favorite Senator Rand Paul, America's sweetheart, right? I think that's his nickname. And the two of them were talking about the bill just passing and why Brian Kilmeade thinks TikTok is a danger. And believe it or not, Nick, Rand Paul was on ByteDance's side, and he explained why. Take a listen to this.
He could not
but
assure
that's an opinion,
that
Brian.
ByteDance.
That's your opinion. That's your opinion.
No, nobody thinks
well,
the Texas project. Nobody thinks. Let me finish. Nobody thinks the Texas project is up and running and is effective.
I do. So the thing is when you say nobody believes that it is.
And let me just finish. They could not answer. The CEO would not assure that Beijing would not have access to personal information for 170 million Americans.
And their
news feed, which is number one with young people. It is true. The number one with young people.
Even if it were true, Brian, it's an allegation. You are making allegations against a company owned by Americans, and you have to prove it in court.
Who owns that company? Who owns that company? ByteDance. ByteDance is owned by China.
No, it's not. See, that's a lie, and you're defaming the country. You're defaming the company. 60% of it is owned by international investors, 20% is owned by the software developers who are Chinese, and 20% is owned by the employees, 7,000 of whom are Americans. So
who controls the algorithm?
But it's not owned by the government.
It's not about profits. Who owns the algorithm?
TikTok owns their own algorithm, and it's actually not in China.
And who owns TikTok? ByteDance. And who owns ByteDance? The Chinese government.
No, they don't. See, you've just told a lie, Brian. You can't say on TV something that's a lie about a company.
Okay.
That is an out-and-out lie, and it's provably
what is
false.
A lie?
And they're not owned by the Chinese government. TikTok is owned privately, 60% by international investors.
ByteDance controls the algorithm. That's all that matters. You're talking about profits.
Let me finish.
I've been listening to you.
All right, so there's a lot there. And I want to kind of clarify some of this stuff, Nick, before I get your takeaways. TikTok, as of last May, in a report that was published, available on you can go to Inc.com to kind of read this, because ByteDance's CEO stepped down in 2021, but he kept a percentage of the company. So 60%, like you heard Rand Paul say there, of ByteDance is beneficially owned by global institutional investors such as the Carlyle Group, General Atlantic, and Susquehanna International Group. I'm definitely butchering that name. SIG is probably the initials, because there's no way they wanted to put that name for being that long. 20% is owned by employees of ByteDance. So this is kind of what Senator Rand Paul was mentioning there. 20% was owned by employees. I think he mentions in the segment as well, and I'm not sure if it played there in that clip, but about how many U.S. folks work for ByteDance. There is a lot of U.S. employees that work for ByteDance. The rest are owned by Zhang. Zhang is a former software engineer, and he founded ByteDance. And why Brian Kilmeade was so adamant about the Chinese government influence is because, like with most big Chinese companies, the CCP has set up a party branch at ByteDance. So this is in 2014, according to their state media, which is why it's raised concerns about Beijing's influence over the company. U.S. officials have criticized TikTok's security and privacy. They're suggesting that user data may be shared with Beijing, excuse me. And then we were talking about it before. I think he mentioned it there. We mentioned it with Representative Bowman a few months ago about Project Texas, which was something that was going to try to be formed here in Texas from a data collection standpoint. ByteDance could share, it could sell their shares, or at least work with this company or this group that was being put together to have the data collection and storage maintained here by a U.S.-owned company. And that was TikTok formed an alliance recently with Oracle. If you don't know who Oracle is, huge San Francisco, Silicon Valley-based company, and started to host American user data in there in the U.S.'s in the U.S.'s firm cloud infrastructure. This is as of 2020 that they started to do that. So just some background here and context. So Nick, I turn to you real quick. What did you make of, well, now you know a little bit more about ByteDance. What a name for a company. We all know everything now about ByteDance. It's not what Brian Kilmeade said they're owned by China, but there is an impropriety here about the influence that it could have, as I just mentioned about Beijing creating a party on it. So, what do you make of the exchange? What do you make of Representative Ro Khanna first? What do you make of Rand Paul protecting ByteDance here? Is he a Chinese spy now? That's what I've been. That's been alleged on Twitter. I mean, give me a break. I mean, who knows? What do you make of it all?
Yeah, I mean, I'm showing my age when I have, a member of Congress trying to explain to me that TikTok is somehow the great bastion of First Amendment and political speech. It's a little like Elon Musk talking about TikTok or Twitter, and it's silly to me. I mean, I'm 45. I look at Twitter as just a place for people to post screeds of 140 characters, or now up to 280, and TikTok is just for the silly dances. I oftentimes when I'm on TikTok, I don't really see political free speech. And this is what like people send me. It's just funny stuff. So this is an entertainment platform. If people happen to use it to put forward a political message, I mean, that's true for any platform, to try to make TikTok out to be, something that helped to bring us the, information on the Arab Spring in 2009 is silly. But that's my own perspective there.
Right. So that's your feed though, is what I was going to say. Right.
Well, there's that. That's true too. The exchange though on Fox News, there's an argument of semantics here. So on the other day, I was listening to MSNBC, and there was this conversation of, in terms of, actually, no, this was actually another podcast, and a reporter was on talking about, with ByteDance, what we have to understand is that the opportunity for the Chinese government to have access to information because of ByteDance is legitimate. As I understand it, the agreement in place is that should ByteDance continue to have ownership of TikTok, a portion of that is tied to the Chinese government. And China's law is that if you are doing business in China, the Chinese government can be able to call all your information over. Now, the funny thing is, that's actually not quite different than the U.S. Case in point, so back the state of Nebraska, and I always bring up this example in Nebraska because it's maybe one of the most harrowing stories of the use of social media, or the way it can be compromised to the endangerment of an American citizen. So in the state of Nebraska, there was a woman who at the time, an anti-abortion law was being put in place, and this woman was trying to seek an abortion. So she's trying to leave state lines. Now, there was a Facebook message exchange between her and her mother was just checking to see if she was okay, was trying to advise her on how to move through this process of getting out of state for this medical procedure. That information, that exchange was actually taken by the state government of Nebraska. It was used by law enforcement to arrest this woman. In isolation, what I just said sounds like something that would happen in another country. It sounds like something that, wait for it, China may do. So it is a little ridiculous to me that we're so worried about the Chinese when American companies or the United States government can be able to do this. We have seen examples of Facebook has had to do some hand wringing about sharing information, with the United States government, but the U.S. government can be able to have access to information. We've seen this actually with Apple and iPhones, being able to access devices if need be. And yes, companies here it's not a given that they have to play in the sandbox of the U.S. government. It's not quite the same as China. But let's not be naive enough to say that the United States doesn't have some level of influence. That all being said, that exchange just on Fox News was about semantics. The bottom line is, from what I get, China could have access to user information per the agreement that they have in place with ByteDance. So when Kilmeade says, well, the Chinese own TikTok, that's an assumption in terms of the level of influence that China has. It is a vast oversimplification of what the reality currently is. If we're arguing that whether or not can China have access to TikTok user information, the answer is yes, at least from what I understand. And there's no way to refute that. That's why, at least a big reason for 300 plus members of the House to vote the way they did is because they view this as a security threat. So I get that, but it's just stunning to me. And now, funny enough, in terms of some of the no's, I know Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in New York had said no. Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia had said no. So we're seeing some interesting, strange bedfellows forming by those who've said no. Coincidentally, these are the same people who use this platform really effectively and rightfully are young enough to say, well, wait a minute. Like, what are we doing here? I mean, to see Marjorie Taylor Greene say no is funny to me because she's obviously a huge Trump supporter, and Trump has been very critical of China, and that felt like a little bit of a distancing between herself and the former president. But it was fascinating to see, what is informing the no's. And again, this entire thing I'm sharing with all of you listeners is what was going through my head when I deleted the app. But please understand, I chose to delete the app. I felt, this does seem like the possibility of data compromise, not necessarily from China, but in general, it just seemed like this was an app that could be a problem, a situation that could emerge. So I chose as an individual to do that. What's odd here is that if I'm a betting person, and I am, this ain't going to pass the Senate. I just don't see it happening. But the fact that one body of the United States legislature is so concerned with a business that they want to force it to be sold. That's key. That's, for sports fans, this is like when the NBA forced, the Los Angeles Clippers, to sell, right? Which was unprecedented. And since then, many NBA owners have looked at that precedent and have been very leery of it ever since, including other sports leagues. So to see the House try to, move this forward based on a political agenda, I'm not necessarily completely against it. I am a little bit sympathetic, but I do think it's a little short-sighted.
You landed the plane there really well, because I was going to say the biggest takeaway for me in all of this, and again, data collection, we got into that, forcing the U.S. government, forcing a company to sell to U.S.-based, again, ByteDance doesn't have to do that. The app doesn't have to exist here. I just mentioned 1 billion monthly users. So obviously, it's available in other countries. TikTok and ByteDance would still be successful. I mean, they would lose a huge swath of the U.S. Obviously economy and the 150 monthly users, 150 to 170 monthly users. One thing I did want to mention, though, stay off social media. If you don't want to use social media, a lot of people say social media is not a real place. It's not a real place, but people do use it to gather information. And then when they take that information, they regurgitate it back to their friends. And don't take my word for it. Just look at the engagement stats. The average time spent on the app, according to the US, the average adult uses TikTok 33 minutes per day on the application. Facebook is up to 35 minutes per day. Those are number one and number two in terms of average time spent on social media platforms. And again, remember, Facebook and Instagram. Facebook owns Instagram now as part of Meta. TikTok engagement has grown by 1,533% over the last 6 years. So that means that a lot of people have started to use this platform, and they use it for a lot of different things. And, we talked about the creator portion of this, but at the end of the day, the biggest thing is collection of data and what the information being served to you as a content platform. Do they have the ability to spread misinformation and disinformation? And then the last thing is how people rely on it for making money, which social media has changed. We'll see about that. We'll keep following this. But you know what? When we come back after the break, why don't we ask somebody that has the power to vote on these things? Representative Jasmine Crockett, she joins us. We talk about the TikTok bill. We talk about the crisis at the U.S. southern border. Is she hearing that from her constituents? Representative Crockett, when we come back after the break. Nick, today's episode is presented as always by our friends over at Fresh Roasted Coffee. Since 2009, their passion has always been bringing you gourmet coffees from all over the world, roasted fresh to order. I got my coffee snob here, Nick Saveri. Nick, tell these people, coffee snob it up here. Tell these people why Fresh Roasted Coffee is so good and why they're the official sponsor of Can We Please Talk.
Often the best cup of coffee that you're ever going to have is the one you can make from home. And you need good quality coffee to do that. And that's what Fresh Roasted Coffee offers. Between single origin, between blends, flavors, anything on the coffee spectrum they've got. But more importantly, and I can't stress this enough, often when you purchase coffee, you don't know where to start. I mean, there's so many different varieties, so many different opportunities, so many different things you could choose from. And Fresh Roasted Coffee just gives you a very simple questionnaire and just says, hey, figure out what your coffee cup is. Figure out what blend works for you. I've gotten some single origin recommendations, so has Mike, and that's influenced everything. And what they recommend, you can get in a Keurig cup, the way Mike takes it. You can take it in the way I do it, which is typically through a French press, or you can get it for a percolator. Whatever coffee machine you've got, they've got you covered. But more importantly, just a huge variety and a way to learn more about coffee itself.
And all of this is available at freshroastedcoffee.com on their site. 1 cup is all it takes to fall in love with Fresh Roasted Coffee, but you get a discount for being a listener of Can We Please Talk. Enter in the promo code Can We Please Get 20 to get 20% off your first purchase. Head to freshroastedcoffee.com today. Nick, quick break from the pod because this episode is presented by our friends over at SeatGeek. Your next best night ever is waiting, my friend, and they've got the tickets. You want to go to an NBA game, an NFL game, a concert, Major League Baseball, whatever it is, all you got to do is go to SeatGeek.com. You're going to enter in the promo code Can We Please Talk, and you're going to get $20 off that purchase right now at SeatGeek. Nick, what are you going to do with your $20 off on those tickets, buddy?
I mean, that saves me on anything. I can get food at the game. I can just get the tickets themselves. I mean, baseball's coming along, so I'm excited for that. I can get upper deck tickets and just nothing. And then just all I got to do is worry about food. I mean, anywhere I want to use this, it's well worth it. $20 is a worthwhile investment.
That's right. And I've seen you at sporting events. You eat a lot. Nick needs those $20 off. So go to SeatGeek.com right now. Enter in the promo code Can We Please Talk. You're going to get $20 off that purchase. All right, joining us now to break down all the latest news and notes that are happening in D.C., the recent House bill banning TikTok. We're going to get into that in a second because there was somebody that voted present on that bill, and she happens to be joining us here, and that's Representative Jasmine Crockett, representing the great state of Texas in the 30th District out there. Representative Crockett, Mike Leon, Nick Savary, thank you so much for hopping on the podcast with us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
So I want to get into that real quick because there's a bunch we want to get into with you. Obviously, the immigration bill that happened in the Senate didn't happen. Obviously, you live in a border state, so I want to get a bunch there with you into that. But first and foremost, we had Representative Jamal Bowman on. I was telling you a while back, a few months ago, before the House came up with this TikTok bill and how it passed in the House recently, and he had met with a coalition of TikTok influencers, and they were really talking about the economy for them. Like, this is the way they make money. And obviously the security concerns around the ByteDance company and the data, protection of consumer data is at the core of this. But what went into your decision in terms of voting right now? And how do you feel about the bill overall and what TikTok is doing with this ByteDance company?
So overall, I appreciated the spirit of the bill. I felt like execution is where we were failing a little bit. And so I couldn't be a yes or a no because I don't want to send a signal as if TikTok is okay in the hands of the Chinese, because I don't believe that. I do have grave concerns about the CCP and their antics, not only when it comes to social media, but in a lot of conversations that I've had on a number of CODELs to other countries, I mean, these folk are like the mob, right? And I think that we got caught slipping before when it came down to social media. That's how we ended up with January 6th. That's how we ended up with the Russian disinformation. That's how we ended up in a problematic stance. The problem that I have is that Congress in and of itself is behind. And if we're going to do something, we need to do something that will stand the test of time as it relates to social media and AI. And so I didn't really like the idea that this was more singularly targeted at TikTok. I understand that we have the grave concerns around China. We have the grave concerns around the algorithms that are being pumped out. But to be perfectly honest, I feel a way about X right about now. And like to say, hey, you've got to sell your company. Well, who's to say that Elon won't be the one to buy it? Like, I mean, like there were so many issues that I had around the execution. And I just think that it was a matter of a rushed situation, not to mention I also have concerns about the constitutionality of it. So, it'll be interesting to see if the Senate tries to take it up. People always joke about how old the Senate is. I don't know if the Senate really wants to try to delve into this space right now. But I do think that if they do delve into this space, hopefully they won't just take this bill, they'll come up with their own. And in conference committee, we can get something that actually makes a little bit more sense and actually spans social media and the AI technologies kind of as a whole.
Yeah, to that end, Representative Crockett, something that stood out to me, in this conversation of TikTok, Purdue Global reports that, since really like 2013, we've seen like 10 massive data breaches. Companies like Yahoo, companies, I think like the Equifax was the other one.
Oh, yeah.
This bill comes out, and I agree with you. Like, the spirit of it makes sense. In the conversation about this bill, though, was there conversations of expanding this beyond, one particular organization, or, as it relates to the Chinese, to explore the possibility of any organization that has access to that level of data held to a certain level of scrutiny and regulation, as opposed to just TikTok?
I'm glad that you brought up the data breaches. This is something that we discussed on the State House level as I served on the Business and Industry Committee. And we've got a lot of work that we need to do around privacy in general. That was not discussed. There is language in the bill that expanded this beyond TikTok a little bit. It laid out if a platform has more than 1 million subscribers and if it is foreign owned. Again, it was still kind of focused on only foreign owned. And, my concern is that we have issues not only with TikTok, but we have issues with social media as a whole and some of these algorithms and potentially them getting into the wrong hands. And so that's really my big concern is disinformation overall, misinformation overall. Those are the things that worry me, is what is being fed to the American people. And a lot of times it's being done on platforms that are American owned. So I think if we want to get at the heart of protecting Americans more holistically, then we need to step back and figure out some parameters. And the problem is we never have. We've never taken that stance. It's always been ahead of us. And one of the things that I thought about, and I'm sure that y'all will remember, I'm like, if TikTok goes down, y'all do realize there will be something else, right? Like, before TikTok, there was Snapchat, and I know Snapchat still exists, but not really on the level that it did, right? We know that young people migrated away from Facebook. We know that MySpace used to exist. We know that there used to be a Black Planet. We know that there was always, like, social media is rapidly developing. And so if TikTok goes down, it doesn't mean that somebody else won't come up. And so I just think that we need to have a real conversation around this, and we need to put real parameters that respect who we are as Americans and make sure that it is constitutional, while also being very strategic about balancing that out with the security concerns and privacy. Privacy is a huge issue. We've been talking to banks about that. We've been talking to our healthcare providers about that, because they actually house our most sensitive information. And so it is important. And as you mentioned, Equifax, right? They house very important information as well. So I think that we really do need to come up with something more comprehensive. But in the House right now, we want to continue to play with Hunter Biden and his nude photos instead of dealing with something, maybe of substance.
We're going to get into Hunter Biden right now. You fed into the no, I'm kidding. I totally agree with you, like I said. And I would say this as somebody, Nick and I have covered this on the show, but I've worked in product and technology for 15 years, including some of these competitors of a TikTok, adjacent with them, and other streaming services that collect data. So very important issue to me. I'm glad that you kind of laid out why you voted president. I think that's really important to lay out for the people here. One thing I did want to know is, obviously, if the Senate does take it up, President Biden has already said he would sign, whatever bill came into his desk. So let's stick on the president for a second, because last week he gave a little tiny speech that not that many people watched, millions of Americans. I want you really to kind of lay out for me, your overall impressions of the speech and the president that night and what he said to the American people. And now as we head into November and the Democrats are trying to flip some seats here and there, and President Biden's obviously trying to get reelected, do you think people will remember some of the words that he said in March until November, excuse me?
I think so long as he stays out on the trail and continues to remind them, then they absolutely will continue to remember. Immediately after the State of the Union, he went to Pennsylvania. And as he was in Pennsylvania, he reiterated a number of those things. And we know that the name of the game when it comes to elections is repetition. They tell you that you need to hit people at least 3 times at the doors. And the reason that you get inundated with text messages and emails is because repetition is really what it takes to really get it to seep in. So I fully anticipate that he will continue to hit his stride and remind people the things that he said during that State of the Union. But I was like sitting over there just beaming with pride. Because I feel like as a Democrat who has consistently been put out there as a messenger now for the Democrats, at least in the House, I feel like sometimes people just feel like I'm just defending the president because I'm a Democrat. And I try to explain to them that I have an opportunity to interact with the president. So when HER's initial report came out and insinuated that he was this senile, feeble old man, and it was at the same time that we were having our Democratic issues retreat. And we had just seen the president. The report came out, and then the president came on stage about 10 minutes later. And I hadn't even had a chance to review the report until after he spoke. And I was flabbergasted. Number one, as a former public defender, I never had the senile old man defense. Like, that never stopped like any prosecutors from charging my clients. Like, hey, he went and killed somebody. Well, he's senile and he old. Well, you're gonna have to prove that in front of a jury, honey. Like no one ever did not get charged for what HER was laying out, number one. Number two, I was like, I've had so many chances to interact with him, and it's kind of shameful because I'm like, honestly, my memory is worse than his. He'll tell me about things that happened way before I was born. Any given day of the week. And so, I was just really offended, and it gave me the vibes of what we had to deal with Hillary and that report that came out as the October surprise. And so the only thing that I could say was, well, thank goodness it ain't October. That was kind of my feel. But as you go out there and you talk about your interactions with the president, it's not the same as people seeing it for themselves. And I think that's one reason that he had record-breaking fundraising every single hour that he talked. He talked the first hour, broke a record. And then going into that second hour, because he only went a little over an hour, broke another record. And then I guess other people finally were waking up in the third hour. He ended up, breaking another record. And it was because I think he brought about this calm for the American people, as well as excitement, because Democrats have been complaining that Democrats overall aren't hitting back hard enough, and they wanted to see some fight in the president. And that was the one thing that I really wanted him to do. And I think he knocked the Republicans off their feet.
Representative Crockett, to that end about Congress and, obviously the State of the Union, something that had come up in the State of the Union a couple of times were bills that have the potential to make seismic changes, much needed changes, or restore protections in place. For example, the John Lewis voting bill, rather. As a Democrat or as a member of Congress, where are you with, what we're seeing in terms of a lack of action? In terms of bills passing through Congress right now, we're early in 2024, but there seems to be a lot of stalls that are coming in, either between mostly in the House right now. Obviously, with House Republicans taking over, we're seeing just a change of a readiness to get things done. And when those bills are mentioned by the president during the State of the Union, I did wonder about. There's so many things that seem to be on the proverbial floor that could be making a huge difference for Americans. As a member of the House, how does it strike you when there's so much possibility for momentum, but it's hard to get a lot done?
Yeah, it is so tough to be in the House in the 118th. We will go down in the history books, if they're allowed to have history books in the future, as the most ineffective, the most dysfunctional, really one of the most heartless Congresses ever. In the 118th. This is what I walked into. And this isn't me being partisan. This is just in looking at the facts and knowing the numbers. And the numbers are clear. Last year, we passed less than 30 bills. That wasn't on the Senate. It was on the House. It's because the House can't function. And so normally in a year, you would get through over 300 bills and get them signed into law. And even when you do the analysis of what did get passed, it was a bunch of continuing resolutions, right? Like they weren't even like full blown bills. One of the things that I thought was really important that the president did say was send me a Congress that is ready to work, basically, right? Send him another Democratic Congress because he has made historic wins. And ultimately, the history books will look back and yes, they will say that he was the oldest president that we ever had. But they will also say that he has been one of the most effective presidents and he only had a Democratic House and Senate for the first 2 years. So imagine what he could have done if he had help for the other 2 years. We're talking about $137 billion worth of student loan debt that has been forgiven, that has given over 4 million borrowers relief despite Trump's Supreme Court. We're talking about cutting child poverty for Black folk in half with a child tax credit by giving them $300 a month for, that first 2-year kind of stint of his time. We're talking about all the money that is coming out from the Infrastructure Act. And, a lot of times us in the House, as well as the administration, will throw these, names around and no one knows what's in these 1,000-page bills. But let me tell you, my city in Dallas, we just got $80 million on last Friday. And that was through the Infrastructure Act. And that was through a grant called Reconnecting Communities, because we know in almost every major city, there is a red line somewhere where Black communities have been separated from all of everything, right? Economic opportunities, housing opportunities. And so this money is specifically to reconnect communities. And knowing that I represent a district that is majority minority, I have the most African-American densely populated district in the state of Texas, I was super excited to see this money. This is actually investing in areas that have been forgotten and thrown away. When we look at the amount of money that we've been able to pour out, people talk about Flint and they talk about the lead, but the reality is that this administration has cared about the environment on a whole other level. And when they were able to pass legislation in those first 2 years, we're talking about cleaning up the water, the air, as well as the soil in these areas that have been dumping grounds for cement plants and shingle plants and things like that. And they tend to be Black and brown communities. So while I'm not as optimistic as the president, I'll be honest, on all the legislation that could get passed if we have a Democratic House and a Democratic Senate, because we know the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act passed out the House twice, but it stalled in the Senate, and the Senate at the time was still democratically controlled. Obviously, we still have issues with the filibuster. We still have issues with what the senators will take up and decide is worthy of a carve out. And I personally believe voting rights is there, but who knows? Same thing when it comes to, codifying Roe. I don't know if we're there yet. And it's not in the House. I think we could absolutely get out the House. I always worry about the Senate until this term. This term, the House is the problem. But there's a lot more that we can do to help struggling families. We can continue to protect them, whether we're talking about the SNAP benefits that they only get $6 a day for, whether we're talking about bringing back the child tax credit that was able to make such a big difference, whether we're talking about the housing proposal that was made by the president, recognizing that the interest rates are still so very high right now, that people are not really in the best position to buy, but saying, hey, we'll do $400 a month for you so that you can go ahead and get into a house and be able to buy down some of those rates. So there's a lot that we want to do, but the Republicans can't even pass a budget. Like, we can't do our basics, let alone a little bit of the extra stuff.
Well, you touched on a bunch there. I want to dive into some stuff, especially some of your constituents. But the president mentioned a bunch there. Nick had just alluded to it about some of the bills that didn't pass that he would sign into legislation. Let's get into one of them because, as I've been doing coverage, and we ran into each other at CNN, as I've been doing coverage for CNN across the special elections and the primaries and caucuses, one of the biggest things in the exit polls is always a look at immigration. And so I've been very vocal about this immigration bill in the Senate that failed, that didn't even, make it dead on arrival in the House, because of the way it was constructed by an extremely conservative senator. And then Chris Murphy, a Democrat from Connecticut, where I used to live and where my father still lives, and Kyrsten Sinema maybe helped, who knows. And they put this bill together. And again, compromise was at the center of it, right? In terms of the judges that it would hire, the immigration backlog. I mean, I'm talking to a lawyer here. About backlogs. We're going to get into that in a sec. But can you just kind of give us a 30,000-foot overview as you are representing a border state, a true border state? When people think of border states, they think of Arizona, they think of Texas, right? You're representing that. When you saw this immigration bill and the parts of it that didn't make it to the House that could have addressed, to Nick's point before, some of the issues that voters for some reason are saying at top of mind, here's a bipartisan compromise on it. We can't even get that passed. What did you make of that immigration bill dying out? Did you like parts of it? Did you not like it? It wouldn't have made it. What's your read on it?
It would have made it. I don't know that I would have voted for it, but it would have passed for sure, because the Republican senators were very clear. This was the most conservative immigration bill that has ever been proposed. And fixing immigration, to me, doesn't necessarily look like being the most conservative at all. And so, while I think there would have been that immediate relief valve that we would have hit, which would have helped out with the funding. Like, I want the money. I want the money part of this. I don't know that Republicans are really best suited when it comes to having a compassionate heart on what to do with those that are seeking refuge and a better life in America. And, you don't necessarily have to read into the specifics of the bill, but you can listen to the rhetoric that is typically used by the Republicans when it comes to migrants. They're invaders. You hear Trump calling them criminals. You hear that, I think he said they had broken out of insane asylums. You have my governor in the state of Texas that thinks it's okay to put up death traps that have legitimately killed people. This is how they think about immigration. So, I mean, you really have to wonder, whereas Democrats think of and understand the benefits of immigration. It's kind of like the glass half full versus the glass half empty is how the two parties look at it. We recognize that Japan had an issue when they decided to limit the growth of their population, as well as they decided to limit the amount of immigrants that were coming in. They ended up in a financial crisis. Immigrants are a part of the fabric of who we are as Americans. We are a country of immigrants. Some of us were stolen from our land, and other ones came over willingly. But nevertheless, we are a country of immigrants. And I remember going to one of the schools in my district. It's a law magnet school, very diverse school. And they were the only people, and this was when I was running for Congress at this time. This was when I was running for my first term. That is the only time I have been in district and been asked about immigration, is by high school kids. And they were asking out of concern for some of their friends. No one else has ever asked me about immigration at all in the state of Texas, in Dallas whatsoever. I'll have meetings and roundtables as a member and we'll talk about different things, but on the trail, no one has ever asked me except for these kids. And I told them my stance at the time. But before I did, I said, let me ask you, how many of you are planning to say, grow up and go work on a farm? No one raised their hand. And the people that don't recognize that we've shifted and we've changed in this country, and I had no idea I would end up on agriculture. But as people complain, well, food costs too much money. Well, wait a minute, y'all need to make sure that y'all kick all the immigrants out. I'm like, now y'all sending y'all kids to school, we complaining about student loan debt, but who y'all gonna go and make sure we got some food to eat, right? Like, just understanding how we work. And it's like, if you have no one to work the farms, guess what happens? The cost of labor goes up. So what happens? The cost of your food goes up. So all of these things are interrelated. And the fact that we're not having real conversations about that and saying, listen, these are people that aren't coming over here as invaders. They're not trying to hurt us. What they're trying to do is they're trying to get away from an unstable situation. And we need to make sure that they have a way to work. And when they work, because they're not citizens, they pay taxes. But guess what? They don't get to vote. They don't get Social Security. They don't get any of that. And so it's like, yo, this helps us, right? Like, these people aren't saying, I want to go and lay up in a hotel, or I want Abbott to fly me on a plane. These are people that are coming over trying to work. And a lot of them are willing to work the jobs that so many Americans are not willing to work. And we've had conversations with the Texas Business Council and other business organizations. I wish they would come out front and speak a little louder, but they're complaining. They're saying, y'all need to fix immigration because we need workers now, because our economy is booming so much. We have record low unemployment right now. And they're saying we still don't have enough workers. We need more workers. And it doesn't matter what industry I talk about. This is across every single industry, whether we're talking about manufacturing, whether we're talking about hospitality, whether we're talking about healthcare. It is a consistent refrain. So we need not look at immigrants as the enemy, but they are our friends, as they have been historically in this country. But Republicans are concerned that if they come in, and because they're not white men, who knows, we may end up in a situation where they'll end up becoming citizens one day. And if they become citizens, they may not vote for them. Like, it's absolutely insane. Instead of coming up with humane policies that make people, whoever they are, want to vote for you. They don't want to do that.
On the subject of challenges working with Republicans, you have the interesting place of coming to Congress, being a representative of the state of Texas. And I thought about, when you were coming on today, which do you find to have been more challenging? Working in the Texas state legislature as a Democrat, or currently in the House as a Democrat?
Very tough question. I don't know. They are different for different reasons. I will say that I am more effective on the federal level, because even though the Republicans are in disarray and problematic, because we're dealing with such large amounts of money, and because the Democrats were so successful in the 117th, it provided an opportunity for me to still take care of my district. In my first year of my first term, we were able to secure almost $200 million for my district by being able to help my city and county and state elected officials pull down on federal dollars in a very aggressive way. We also were able to secure one of the ARPA H locations, which basically in the Inflation Reduction Act, there were 3 facilities that are specifically focused on research to make sure that hopefully if and when another pandemic comes around, we can be ahead of the game. I was able to work in a bipartisan way to get one of those 3 facilities to my district specifically. I worked with the chair of appropriations, Kay Granger, and she was a great partner. And she pulled in Republicans for me. I got Democrats, and we were able to get that. And it's a multi-billion-dollar investment right here in my district. So I feel as if I'm more effective on the federal level, despite the dysfunction. But that's only because I came in after one of the most successful sessions. And so that's been really good. On the state level, I will say, whether it was good or bad, they got bills passed. Most of them were bad, right? But, it was always an uphill battle, and I just could not be as effective and impactful for my district on the state level. I could not get this level of funding to be directed to a district that really is in need of resources. So it's kind of a mixed bag. I will say that definitely more got done. Probably more bad things got done, on the state level than on the federal level. But on the federal level, I have absolutely been able to be a lot more impactful to my district.
That's what we do here. We ask the tough questions like Nick did right there. So let me ask you another one. I can't thank you enough again for hopping on the program with us and giving us some time. But let's take out the Will Smith Men in Black pen here. I'm about to erase your memory and say you don't want to run for Congress either in the state house or at the federal level. If somebody could give you that opportunity to not do this again, continue your career as a public defender or whatever other work you were doing, philanthropic, whatever advocacy, whatever it is, do you feel like you're getting more? Sounds like you are going to say yes, but do you feel like if you had to do it all over again, you wouldn't have gotten into public politics? Because it looks like on the surface for people watching this, and again, I say this now as a contributor on TV, it looks like, and Nick has always made this analogy of wrestling, right? There's a bit of a performance to it. Somebody told me once upon a time, somebody told them something off camera, and then on camera, they did something completely different. So if you had the opportunity all over again, do you feel like you're making an impact, or would you try to do it some other way or means?
I tell people all the time I hate politics. I hated it before I got into it, and I still hate it, but I don't think I'd change it. You end up at these crossroads in your life, and for those that don't know, I'm a preacher's kid, and you try to figure out what God's purpose on your life is. And as adversarial and as ridiculous as my political life has been, it has been so dramatic. I do believe that this is the path that was chartered for me specifically, and specifically for this time. And I had an opportunity to talk about my predecessor a little earlier today at an event, and my predecessor served in this seat for 30 years and served the people of Texas for a total of about 50 years. She did 20 years between the state house and the state senate, and then she ultimately ended up in the U.S. House. And I tell people all the time that I felt like I was being punked when she called me and said, you should be the one to replace me. Because number one, she had been retiring for a decade. And number two, I was like, why was she called the wild child, right? Because she was not the wild one. She was a very stoic, very, very serious. Not that I'm not, I'm obviously very serious. I do crack jokes though. But nevertheless, one of the things that she said to me, and it will always stick with me, is that it's time for me to go. She said, Congress is just not the same. To have a Black woman who had been there for 30 years feel like there was something completely different about Congress, that it was time for her to go, tells you about where we are right now. And I think that the work that I've done defending some of the hardest cases in some of the smallest, probably most racist towns you can find between Texas and Arkansas, it created this level of strength that I have it also created this commitment to fight for people who historically have just been downtrodden, forgotten, or just ignored. And so, I have this passion and this fire that burns within me consistently to wake up and say, I am not going to let these people take my country. I am not going to let these people destroy everything that my ancestors worked for, everything that my ancestors died for or were willing to die for, all because why? For nothing other than hate and just hate. So I think that, to whom much is given, much is required. And while I never saw this being the turn for my law degree, I would be very happy going back to making money. I am very thankful and humbled that I have an opportunity to fight vigorously, not just for the people of my district, but for the people of the United States for a more perfect union.
We leave it there. I mean, again, very well said. I can't thank you enough, Representative Crockett, for giving us a couple minutes here. I want to say continued success to you. Keep fighting the good fight, and please stay safe.
Absolutely. Thanks, y'all.
This episode is brought to you by Kitcaster. Kitcaster books you on top podcasts. How do funded startup founders attract prospects and talent? Podcast interviews. How do entrepreneurs with exits find new deals? Podcast interviews. How do C-suite execs differentiate in crowded markets? Podcast interviews. Kitcaster books you on top podcasts. Click the link in the show notes for a special offer. Celebrate good conversation.
All right, our thank yous there to Representative Jasmine Crockett. Like I mentioned, the 30th district out there in Texas. If you follow social media, you may have seen clips of her at different committee hearings and, really being, how do I say this? I mean, she joked about it, right? She's make some jokes, but also bring facts, be adversarial. But like, I have to do this, right? Because I need to call you out. Like, you're telling me something and I know that this is not true. And also, she spent years, she mentioned there as a public defender, you got to deal in the law. The law deals in facts. Like, you can't bring in innuendo, speculation. Like, you had to bring in factual evidence. And so she has a career and a background in that. Nick, would you make, I mean, obviously, we've seen her a bunch across the television dial. I ran into her one day as we were both about to go on Laura Coates Live. And we hit it off and we started talking about different things. And for another member of Congress to come on this program obviously gives us a little bit more validity, but it speaks to why our message is resonating with folks, because I feel like, and she mentioned it there too, like she talked about at the end, like some bipartisan stuff. We got to work on these things together, man. I mentioned this a bunch, man. This is a group project. Now, I get it. There's some knuckleheads that are faltering here that are causing the group project to go down. They're not doing their part. She's doing her part, and she's keeping at them. What'd you make of the interview overall?
The Congresswoman is a person that we see a lot in the form of sound bites, social media clips, and it makes sense. I mean, she is brilliant. She's able to get her points across, in 30 seconds, in those 140 characters. Like, she's built for this generation of media. But what's refreshing in this conversation, and you all know as listeners or viewers, whenever we have a member of Congress on or anyone who's working in the political sphere, my first and foremost question always is in reference to the people that they serve. If you're a member of the House, it's your district. If you are a member of the Senate, it's your state, and so on. And I appreciated just how she broke down what she's been seeing as the needs of District 30, in Texas. And at the end of the day, national issues obviously are important. The ability to balance a focus on your district and, keep an eye on the status of the nation is part of the job. And she does an effective, work with that. I was telling Mike offline, why am I saying you in the third person? You're right here. I was telling you offline, if the Democrats are smart, give her a platform at the DNC. Like, let her give opening remarks, like give her something prominent, because I could easily see her just in the way she really puts forward the clarity of message, which you and I have talked ad nauseum about as being a problem for the Democrats. She does an excellent job. I think the way she talked about, really helping to really tell the truth about the president. what we've sometimes have seen as potentially being a dowdy and, older gentleman. She's saying, well, no, I've had conversations. This person sometimes has a better memory than I do. Well, that kind of flies in the face of the special counsel right now. But, this is a person who knows what she's talking about. And at the end of the day, see, I just brought the plane home.
There it is.
That's the person we want to have on the show. I was blown away. I'm often very critical of Democrats, at least from a messaging standpoint. And, to have a conversation with her was extremely refreshing.
Well, it's funny, and just to put a bow on this, because the Biden stuff, Jon Stewart joked about it, well, could we see more of that in public? Because you guys are saying in private, he looks amazing. He's got a great memory. And then if you remember, Jon Stewart was getting killed across social media, people saying, come on, what are you doing? Blah, blah, blah. But it is true. Jason Palmer just said it in the last episode, the presidential candidate who won American Samoa from President Biden. He said it. Free him up. Let him talk. Let him be out there, and let people actually see the way he could be over the next 4 years if he gets another 4 years in office. So our thank yous again to Representative Jasmine Crockett. Like I mentioned, go follow her across social media if you want to go check out all of her stuff, bills that she's worked on, her district. Go to crockett.house.gov. For this show, video portions of our interviews with Representative Crockett and others, you can head over to our YouTube channel, type in Can We Please Start Podcast. We should pop right up. Hit the subscribe button for me while you're there. Audio podcast platforms you know by now, Apple, Spotify, Google. Shout out to everybody who listens to us over on Good Pods. Shout out to Acast, our hosting platform. We can't do it without them. And we can't do it without each and every one of you that listens into this program. As always, I am Mike Leon.
And I'm Nick Saberi.
We'll see everybody next time.